Hello, it's Heidi Fisher here, and I'm joined today by Sam Scharf, who's the Director of Community Investment for Orbit Group. And Sam, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Yes, good, I'm glad you're here. So Sam, can you tell me a little bit about your role currently and what you get up to on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, of course. So my role at Orbit Group is Director of Community Investment, and that covers three strands at Orbit. It covers the social investment bucket that we launched November 2018, and is starting to look at how housing associations enter the social investment space. The second bucket in my role looks at investment and commissioning. Very much around in Orbit, we have what we call a Better Days programme, which is about 24/7 mental health support, debt advice, employment programmes, and a range of other commission services, particularly for our customers. And then the third bucket is around what we call placemaking. So I have a team that look at the communities that Orbit own, and how we work with that community to best address not just issues, but actually the assets that that local community have, and bring them back to life where they might have lost energy or been forgotten about. So that sort of straddles across everything that I do.
Okay. So in terms of Orbit, would you say they're quite forward-thinking in terms of their approach, in that they're actually thinking about social investment and there's social value and how they deliver that, or is that something that you've brought in terms of your role and you've developed that?
A bit of both, I guess. Working in a big organisation, you have to be given permission and an allowance to have a go at some of these things. So Orbit's I think is pretty forward-thinking in allowing that exploration. I had the opportunity 18 months ago to go on secondment to Big Society Capital, so that was with an express view to explore social investment and understand how that sits in the housing sector more. And then I came back and worked across a range of partners, which I'm sure we'll talk about a bit more, to bring more of the housing sector into this space. I would say their First Arc were the first housing association that I'm aware of who have sort of gone in quite heavily. So we weren't first in, but yeah, there are many housing associations in the social investment space.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you talked about your secondment at Big Society Capital. Was that when you first became interested in social investment, or was it before then?
It's probably before then, so because I sort of probably knew when the opportunity arose, I knew that it was something that would have been of interest. But you know, across the housing sector and with Orbit, we quite often have social programs, social investment, or what we call community investment, but it tends to be very grant orientated. And in the first 3 years of Orbit, we probably failed 2 or 3 organisations with providing grants. It just, we helped try and set up a social enterprise. We tried to set up a couple of innovation programs, Bright House competitor, and actually, in reflection, grant, though it feels like free money, it wasn't the right type of capital for those projects. It didn't have the longevity for when it didn't quite work or it needed a little bit more. And so I guess that was where I started particularly getting interested, to say we're actually failing organisations that that really are going to contribute to our programme. Are there different ways we should look at this? So that was probably failing was probably the starting point for thinking about this.
It is quite often you find that something's gone wrong and people have to think differently about what they want to do quite often. So that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
So, um, in terms of the social investment, you've talked about investing in organisations. How does that then lead to investing in the communities that you've got housing in, and why is that? Why do you see that as important in terms of having investment in those communities rather than just providing housing?
It's a good question. I think we challenge ourselves a lot in the sector about this. Does it, is community investment an additional function? Is it social responsibility, or is it integral to what we do? I don't think that challenge goes away, and it sort of comes in waves. How we see it at Orbit is that it is integral to what we are as an organisation. We're a responsible business, first and foremost, both in our charitable objects as well as our vision. And the more work we've done, the more we realise that's the case. If you are a people business, which we are, I know that we're an asset business as well, but we've got two costs in there: either the property or the people. Then you can't disassociate the two. So you can't not provide, or I'll put it in a positive line. If you provide good debt advice, we know that it categorically has an impact on our business. If we provide employment support, we know that it now, through research and evaluation and impact management, we know it has a demonstrable impact on our business in a positive way. So, you can come at it through two ways. It's core to what we do as an organisation because of our philosophy, but it's also core because it makes business sense. And you can't work in communities, and communities don't thrive, which is Orbit's mission, to lead in building thriving communities. They don't thrive because there's housing there. I know it's probably a simple statement, but they don't. So you have to address and support the social elements of that, and that's what our placemaking framework at Orbit does. And I think it's fair to say that the sector is, whether it's a fad, that term I don't know, but a lot of the sector's appreciating that more. And the smaller housing associations, probably that's in their DNA even more strongly actually.
Yeah. So you talked there about doing more, and it's an integral part of the DNA of Orbit. There's been a lot of talk, I suppose, and again it probably comes in waves, that actually housing associations need to almost step up and take on some of the statutory duties that the local authority and other public sector agencies would have delivered in the past, but because their budgets have been cut, now the finger has been pointed at housing associations and saying, actually, you need to provide more than housing. You need to be tackling poverty. You need to be getting your tenants into work. You need to be doing all kinds of things. Do you see that as something that you should be doing, and where is there a line or a point somewhere where your obligation stops, or not see it that way?
If there's a line, it's pretty fuzzy. It's a massive challenge, and it's definitely one of those things we wrestle with a lot. Especially, we've built over the last couple of years what we call our universal offers. So it's our Better Days program. It's there as a safety net, and you use that term, you're suddenly into the public sector space. What we've done over time is to establish where we can add value to that proposition. So we have a number of sort of principles or hurdles that we would think about to make sure what we're doing adds value, or fills a legitimate gap. So, you know, do we have better data about the communities that we have, that we're in and that we serve, that no one else has? That means that the services we can provide are more focused. Are the issues that people are being affected by related to the house? You know, whether it be fuel poverty, whether it be isolation, probably to name two. So there are a number of things that we think about to make sure that we are contributing rather than just layering on service after service because it looks good or feels good. And employment's probably one of those ones that is delivered right across the housing sector. And probably you could question what value add is that bringing. But we did quite a bit of research at the beginning when we set that up, and actually that's one of the only services we deliver internally. Most of them we commission out. And actually we saw that we were a strong partner to our customers. They trusted us. We weren't, you know, they don't feel like the pressure on them to move into work is driven by us. So we've really got their best interests at heart. So we actually get really strong outcomes as a sector. And, you know, we've just got an extension as part of what's called Love London Working, which is a 14 housing association across London employment programme. It's delivered, you know, some fantastic results. So it is a challenge. You know, we're in the mental health space, but it really impacts the business. You know, the services, the thresholds for mental health are so high. Actually, people's ability to cope is really being affected, and that hits us quite hard as a service provider. So it doesn't feel overly comfortable all the time that we you know are in this space, but we do it with a very clear reason, and we constantly challenge that. And when it comes to sort of community development, I think we have a much stronger role to play because we physically do own communities. So our responsibility and what we think we can add value to, I think, is much clearer in that space.
Definitely. So you mentioned there about most housing associations have some sort of employment support. It's actually only, I think, around 40%. Quite a large proportion of housing associations don't provide any employment support. And also one of the other stats is around having a social value strategy and how that into the work that the housing association does. So most housing associations, again, only comply with the Social Value Act in that they have a policy around how they'll buy their goods and services, and they haven't really looked at how they can integrate that into the organisation through a strategy that covers how social value operates across the whole organisation. Does Orbit have a wider social value strategy, and how does it work? Does that include buying social? Does that include all of the different areas within the business, or is it very much just focused on your part of the business?
Yeah. So we call it a strategy? We're trying hard not to call it a strategy because we don't want to pull out all of those elements and take away the ownership that comes with that from across the business. So we do have a framework. That is semantics, granted, and I can hear myself say it, but it's a quite a conscious decision we've taken. So, you know, we do have an employee volunteering program. We have a developing environmental program looking at our assets, looking at our offices, looking at supporting our customers. We do have we have a procurement strategy that has social enterprise and social value within that procurement strategy. So what we do have, this framework basically pulls all of that stuff together so we can tell a cross-organisational story about our social value. But we haven't, other than having a coordinator that we're currently looking to put in place, we've spent more time trying to support right across the business to embed that where it's best placed, if that makes sense. Because otherwise, I mean, I think probably to your point, otherwise what happens is community investment is seen as the social value to the business. As a charitable organisation, first and foremost, though we are commercial and we're we say profit for a purpose. Actually, building houses is the biggest impact you can have. But we don't, so we shouldn't think of the £3.5–4 million that sits in community investment as our social impact. So we do buy, we're doing more and more through our supply chain, and our procurement team are really very engaged and working very closely with us in that. So we just in this year brought in Just Ask, who are a very large social enterprise, to deliver ground maintenance and some cleaning. We've just, and these are through our commercial tenders. We've just brought in Nuneaton Signs in the Midlands, who were 50% or so of the workforce that have some form of disability. So we are now very consciously trying to do a lot more to utilise our supply chain, and that lends itself a lot to the focus and the outcomes we're looking for from the Community Impact Partnership, our social investment fund as well.
Okay, we'll come back to the Community Impact Partnership in a moment. Just one quick question in there in terms of the outcomes that you're looking to achieve. How do you measure them? Do you have KPIs at an organisational level around your social investment, or is it just something that is sort of done as a tag on by project?
Both. So with the community investment, we use the Hacked Wellbeing bank around sort of project outcomes, and we spend quite a lot of time making sure that our impact and evaluation program in community investment is proportional and useful. So we use Hacked because we need, across the sector, we've got to have a consistent way of doing this. And for years, we've been flitting back and forth. So we continue to use that in the hope that over time we do develop something that is rigorous and consistent. But we also work with our partners to make sure how they're measuring and managing their social value is impactful for them, not for us. So, if we're working around the health and wellbeing sector, we use webs so that they can tell a story to health providers and the NHS. We use the financial capability tool and framework from the Money Advice Service around money advice. So we try and make sure that what we're doing, it tells us a useful story, but first and foremost, that impact is useful for the organisations delivering it. And then to your point about sort of organisational KPIs, I can say it because we have just got there, so it's pretty fresh, but we do have a KPI suite that covers environment, suppliers, employees, customers and communities as our social value strategy or framework, whichever one we want to use. And that we're baselining all of that at the moment, and that will be a sort of 5-year plan to really drive, particularly where we haven't consciously driven some before, so especially around the environment. I might be speaking out of turn, but I don't feel like that's. I think our staff and our customers are further ahead than us as a business on that. It's not something that's necessarily been consciously driven, and I would say that across the sector. I'm sure I'd love someone to watch this and put their hand up and say they're doing amazing stuff, because I'd love to find out what the sector is doing in this space, but it has been a little difficult to find people that are really overtly looking at the environment, which is ironic for some organisations that build and own swathes of land and stuff. But
yeah, there tends to be a lot of measurement of the amount of waste and water and different things that are used in the construction process, but not really any plans to to minimise that in a lot of cases. But no, that there I think in terms of environmental stuff, people are still, that I've seen, are at the early stages of thinking about how they can actually change behaviours around how we impact on the environment, but there's nothing material there really yet.
No, I mean we haven't got anything formal at the moment, but we have sort of facilitated some real energy in the business around something that we call Orbit Earth, and that's been through a whole network of volunteers in the business who are just passionate about it, and they've done some incredible work the last few months, just building some momentum. And I guess what we're starting to see is actually just given that there is a real appetite from staff, whether it's your standard Planet Earth sort of trigger, I don't know, but it doesn't need to be too formal to really start getting this up and running. And we are doing a few things. We started looking at electric fleet vehicles for estates, and we have solar panels, and but it's still feeling a little bit like dabbling in that space.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so you mentioned in one of your answers about the community impact partnership.
Yeah.
What is that, and how did that come into being?
What is it? So formally, it's a joint venture between Orbit, Clarion, Peabody, and London and Quadrant, and so it's a separate company owned by the four partners that is there with an intent to provide social investment not into the whole sector. Our purpose and impact is around placemaking, around enterprise, charities, and purposeful business that really contribute to what we would see as placemaking, whether that's economic, whether that's about the community, whether that's about housing and facilities, and with a sort of secondary lens around the supply chain. So between those four partners, we believe around a supply chain of like 2 billion a year. That directly, that we've got to use that weight, the question is, can we use that weight in the right way? Can we turn that ship into a slightly different direction? If you look at sort of developing countries, they'll very much use their sort of public sector supply chains to incubate and sustain good social business, and then let them grow from there. And so I guess the question is if these enterprises have good trading models, can we support them, not just in finance? And I think that's where what we're trying to unpick at the moment. And the question that we want to ask with this first fund is, grant, as I've said right at the beginning, grant funding doesn't necessarily allow for this to exist and allow for us to do this, but can we use social investment and our supply chains and the support infrastructure we have, whether it be our finance teams, our legal panels, whatever it is, can we really leverage all of that to support the sector in a different way? And that's not a big USP or anything egotistical. Those are some of the realities that we are fortunate enough to have as housing associations in our business model, and we are the biggest social enterprises in the UK. So it's a simple question: can we do things a little differently that can really transform that sort of secondary layer of supply chain, and can we bring in new business? So that's why we set it up. Why those 4 partners? Less strategic. We work together at the National Housing Fed as part of sort of the social enterprise and wellbeing network, and a coalition of the willing, I guess, without it being too big. It still took 18 months, so it was still a piece of work to get us just over the line. But we do see this as our first fund. I think the longer we observe the space and the sector, I guess what we'll end up hopefully finding is where we truly can add value, and where there's already good products in the market. Do we have a better role to play or a different role to play in supporting startups, or because we're really very big, actually, where is there a different role that we should play around scale ups? And that's the sort of work that we just need to figure out as we go.
It sounds interesting. So what was the initial conversation then, when who had the idea, and what did they say? Let's do this?
This is one of those things that you walk into blind and suddenly you realise you're too far in, I think. It materialised from my time at Big Society Capital, because of my express objective to go and see how the housing sector enter this space, and the opportunity came through the growth fund that the Access Foundation oversee. So it gave us an opportunity to sort of de-risk our entry, and explore this. So I mean, how it then ended up being was some phone calls and some conversations saying, look, we have very big community investment programs. We're nearly 30 million as a partnership every year around our grant funding and our community investment programs. So this is a £3 million fund over 8 years. So it's not pittance by any means, but it's not the same scale as what we do on an annual basis with grant. So it felt between those partners that the time was right for all of us to ask that question a little bit, and some of us had already started to explore it as well. So it wasn't any more sophisticated than that, and I hope that one of our outcomes is that we can share that learning with the sector. I think in the first instance, we'd love conversations with the rest of the sector if they see opportunities arise, because we can learn with it. We can learn together, even if they're not formally part of the partnership. This is a non-profit thing. It's set up as a kick. We're not in this to make money. I'd love it if we could even breaking even would be great. We know this is a tough space. So just working with other housing associations at the moment so that we can all learn about this, because I do think that as a sector we've got a big role to play, would be really good.
Definitely. You mentioned there about this is an opportunity to de-risk the idea and kind of separate it out from orbit. Do do you then see that's the main reason why Orbit wouldn't just do this directly itself, or is it more about the fact that as four partners you've got more power? What is it in terms of what you can do that you couldn't do within Orbit, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I don't know. I think it's a good question. Doing new things in big businesses is difficult, I think, and where you can ease that journey a little bit, just is useful to do. And you know, we are very open. You know, Orbit have always been very supportive to do new things and try stuff out. I think that we found some legal challenges around some of, you know, providing loan finance, just because though we're huge businesses, we're quite simple in terms of our financial structures, our loan covenants, and some of those technical things. These were the things we unpicked as we went along, and I think it just, yeah, I don't think it's more complicated than doing it together, shimmying each other along. I'm not sure if I'd have lasted if there was no other pressures to keep going at some points in doing it. We're all good things, but you know, it's opened. I couldn't speak for the other partners, but it's opened our minds to different ways of financing programs. So even, you know, SIP has set up, but alongside that, you know, when we're looking at other propositions, you know, we've just looked at a very small equity investment as Orbit ourselves, just because it's made us a bit more comfortable to be a bit more enterprising, and you know, that's a sort of underlying underlying objective, you know, is to change and including me, our thinking, the culture, and how we consider stuff. Yeah.
So do you think that eventually this will be the core operating mode for Orbit, if we look in 10 or 15 years in the future? Do you think that would be how you would be working, or do you still think that it would be sidelined purely because of kind of the legalities, or figure out a way to work around those?
Yeah, I think that the legalities were cropped up at different times. If you don't know the questions to ask, you don't know where to look for the difficulties, and so I guess the legalities popped up when we were not quite least expecting it, but yeah, they weren't necessarily planned for. We didn't go into this go right. We just need to sort this and this out. We sort of went so far, found an issue. Went so far, found an issue. We worked with 4 partners who will see those differently as well. So, you know, that's some of our learning. In terms of, so I think the legalities are starting to be unpicked. We've done this equity deal to do exactly that as well. Is to say, okay, if we want to do an equity deal, what are the things that we break in the business? So we found, you know, there's 2 streams. We either do it as a charitable investment, or we do it as a financial investment. And one takes us to our investment policy, and one takes us to our charitable objectives. So if you're going to actually, that became much freer than I thought it would be, because you could actually do quite a big equity investment for charitable reasons. So some of it's just about breaking some of that down. So into the future, we're not nervous, and we don't think it's too big a deal. And I think I'd love to think that this becomes a big part of what we can do. You know, we still are working in a sector, social enterprise sector, that struggles to scale. For cultural reasons, as well as business model, as well as being supported properly. And most, this is not a point of a negative point, but a lot of the social investment space is still capital first, with some support around. And obviously you've got Unlimited and SSE, and you know, a lot of the others do provide mentoring and incubators and except all of that jargon, but they don't necessarily have the longer term ability to incubate those organisations. So if we can stay in this space and find the right niche, I think that this becomes a really core part of what we can do. But I do think the types of funds that we will set up in 5 years would look very different than a small debt fund that we have at the moment.
Okay. That's been really interesting talking to you about what Orbit are up to and your ambitions around social and community investment. One final question, thinking more widely about the housing association sector, is what do you consider to be the most important priority for housing associations over the next 10 years?
Building houses.
That's a bit of a cop out. That
isn't that just? I wouldn't want to put a target on it and then never hit it. I think like you would hear from government maybe. It's, you know, I don't say it flippantly. Like, I was in Bexley speaking with the council earlier this week about homelessness, and that, you know, that's when it becomes stark, the problem of the lack of suitable, safe, secure housing that's affordable. And it's not really going away, but it's definitely not going away. And we see it right across the local authorities. If you look at the pincer movement between the probably, you know, I haven't really got a view on it. The sorts of tax changes to PRS, and so the squeeze of the private rented sector and what landlords have done for the last few years, alongside Homelessness Reduction Act and, you know, welfare policy. It's a really tough space, and we cannot seem to unlock the land proposition to build affordably. So, you know, that is not quite my space, but housing association, you know, we talked about it earlier, like having safe, secure housing and homes and communities is by far and away the greatest impact you can have on a family or on an individual. You know, the debt advice is useful and it is important, but I think when you look at the scale of impact we can have, that's really the issue. I think for us, the challenge is how do we do that well? So how do we do that with the social conscience? How do we build communities that genuinely achieve that, so we don't go backwards into mass affordable housing, ghettoed, with no infrastructure, no local economy, all of the things that I think the housing associations have a very, very strong voice to say around what great places genuinely look like. And we've got the ability to deliver that because we're there for the long term. We don't sell all of it. We own lots of it afterwards. So I think that's a very unique proposition for housing associations in addressing that problem.
So it's really about providing more than housing.
If you want to circle all the way back round to right to the beginning of our conversation,
yeah,
I probably would say that.
Yeah.
But if you when you're in you're very fortunate roles within housing, because I do think that they're privileged places to be that no one ever realises there is a sector in until they're in it. When you see what doesn't work and what you see that what does work, you realise how important getting all of those pieces right are. Otherwise, we just go around in circles. And I do, you know, our investment funds as directors of community investment are there to pick up the pieces around failure demand rather than actually genuinely supporting a thriving community.
Definitely. Right, I think we'll leave it there because we could probably debate what you'll be doing for the next in 10 years time forever.
Yes, yeah, I think we could. So.
But thank you so much for joining me today. It's been really interesting. If people do have any questions or want to find out more about what Sam is up to on Orbit and the Community Impact Partnership, his contact information will be underneath the video, so you'll be able to get in touch with Sam to see what he's up to. But thank you very much for joining me today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Heidi.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
All right.